2, 3, 100. Mic check first.
Mic check.
Got it?
Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome very much. So I always start out, Brian, with a pretty simple question. And what I've kind of discovered in meeting with a lot of entrepreneurs like yourself, there seems to be this common thread that at a very young age you sort of realize that you want to build something on your own. You want to do something on your own and not take necessarily the normal path. So tell us about yourself as a kid, where you grew up, what you were doing, and at what point did you kind of realize, I want to do my own thing?
Yeah, I was the youngest of 5 boys, and my whole mother, and kind of got beat up a little bit, especially when I was a younger kid. And so my mom would probably have said that I was the most likely to be an entrepreneur because I was the worst at taking instructions. And I do think there's truth in that people who like, there's no place better than a startup where what you can accomplish is most directly tied to the outcome, to whatever goal it is you're trying to achieve. And I think the bigger the company you work for, if you take a job out of college with a 50,000 person company, then what you do will have very little, if any, effect on the bottom line of that business. And so I think that part of what is always attracted to the world of startups, and why I've always been the person who likes to build things, was because if you execute, if you do what you can, if you set goals and achieve them, then you're the one and the people around you who's most going to benefit from that. I think that is probably why I've always leaned towards working in the startup world for smaller businesses where you can really sort of control what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So we'll reserve all of these sort of bear-related questions, but for later. But you're an unusual case. I mean, let's just say. You are. So you spent a good deal of time in the NFL, and prior to that, I'm sure the bulk of your life was dedicated to football. And now, one day you wake up, and it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
How describe that transition?
Well, part of it is, I think maybe more so than most football players, I never really defined myself by that. The NFLPA, which is always trying to find better ways to brand football players in light of some of the negative stereotypes, and one of the campaigns they did was "Football does not define me," and I had always sort of identified with that on a couple fronts. First, I was a very low. I was like a 2-star high school recruit where I had 2 or 3 smaller school scholarship offers. I went to Vanderbilt, which is a great school, but the worst football program at that time in the SEC. And so, in the sense that I went to college, my 2 final choices for college were Vandy and Princeton. I wasn't choosing football vectors.
Yeah.
And when I was finishing school, my junior year in college, I really didn't think I had any chance to play in the NFL. And so in the sense that I was always kind of making other plans, thinking about what I would like to do as a career, I ended up taking an 8-year detour through the NFL, but I never really thought or planned on playing that long. And so I think to the degree that I looked at my whole time in the NFL as sort of a transition period in my life rather than a career, it made it a lot easier for me to figure out what those things that I wanted to do next were. And that's part of, I went to Kellogg while I was playing a series of off seasons, and I always sort of had one foot in the world of entrepreneurship, especially here in Chicago. Brad Keywell, who's one of the Light Bank guys, came and spoke at a Kellogg class of mine when I was in my 3rd or 4th year in the league. And by the time I left in year 8, he was both a friend and a mentor, and one of many people who helped me kind of figure out where my first step might be into the world of entrepreneurship.
Tell us a little bit about mentoring and how important that was in the process. I mean, you were already thinking about, obviously, through your NFL career about what you would do afterwards. Tell us more about Brad and how he helped you, and anybody else that came along that inspired you for your next step.
Yeah, I mean, I just think in general that usually if you find a great leader, even a great young leader, there's probably some people who had huge influences on them. And nobody gets there alone. And in the French case where it is someone who's just this rogue genius that can just kind of do it on their own, if they really sort of reflected on how they learned what they learned, maybe they had influences that looked a lot like a mentor, even if it wasn't this directly across the table interaction. And so I was always somebody from a very young age who sought people out as a resource, and Brad was one of those. A lot of the people in the Chicago startup community, I think that's what's so fun to see as a Chicagoan now. I've lived here a decade, and I do consider myself a Chicagoan. As the infrastructure gets stronger around places like this here at 1871, but the venture firms and the other guys who seem to be facing the same challenges that you are, whether it's finding service providers or finding qualified engineers to work on this new language that you're using to build your app, like that used to be really difficult to do from guys that I talked to who are a half a generation ahead of me. And you could throw a rock out there in the lobby at 1871, there's probably somebody there who can help you solve problems. And so I think probably my biggest thing about mentors is they don't necessarily have to be older or smarter or wiser or anything else. Sometimes it's as simple as having a sounding board of someone who's facing the same challenges you are and is willing to listen.
So you've had a couple of startups. Tell us a little bit about the first experience. We'll stay the second one. And along the way, tell us about team. I mean, you know that in the NFL or football in general, team is very important, but also in the startup world, I mean, who is part of your core team is incredibly great.
Yeah. So my first startup was a company called OpenChime, which was a light bank portfolio company. I was the 6th employee there, but the first one with no technical background. And so I was kind of the head of business development, all things sort of facing externally from the company, but to leave football, and I literally just left football, and take a deep dive into a technology business like that was a fantastic experience for me. Seeing the challenges that they faced on a day-to-day basis, seeing what they had then been at for about 8 months, and sort of, you always hear about these startups that sort of blow up overnight, and that's almost always at least a 2-year process. And so to see all of the groundwork before Pinterest becomes huge, right. Like there was a whole backstory there, and there always is. And I think that my time at OpenChime was fantastic, even though the company kind of went a little sideways and still in the Lightning family, but has merged a couple times, was tremendous for me to kind of see how much you have to commit of yourself to just have a chance to make something successful. And then as we were pivoting there, the opportunity that ended up becoming OverDog came on the table, and it was just sort of a more natural fit for me on a couple fronts where it was almost so obvious that it was the right thing to do that I didn't really have to think about it that long.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting in my experience, and tell us yours, that the best solutions are typically those that you're solving your own problem. And it's interesting that you went, at a 6th person of this startup at Lightning, and then going and starting OverDog. Whole story, but it just seems more natural to your background, I mean, it just seems like a perfect fit.
Yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know what OverDog is, OverDog is a mobile application that allows athletes and fans to interact through video games. The primary use case would be an athlete, Matt Forte, I always use that example because he's the running back of the Chicago Bears. He would pull out his iPhone and open up the OverDog app issue a challenge to his fans to go play like Madden or FIFA or Call of Duty or any other video game that he plays. And there's a couple of beautiful things about that. Most professional athletes are huge gamers. They skew younger, they have a lot of free time, they have disposable income, and they're intensely competitive. And those are literally the four things that video game companies look for. And so, from a demographic standpoint, athletes are the perfect video game target. And what suited OverDog's needs, the primary thing is that these guys all already do this. And I'll tell the backstory in a second, but OverDog sort of grew out of a company that was trying to help athletes make money off the field and failing at it. But the primary reason, if you sort of distill everything down to its essence of why that wasn't working, is because they were asking athletes to do too much. And whenever you introduce a new behavior to an athlete that's intensely focused, especially during the season, on winning football games or baseball games or basketball games, whatever it is, it's hard to get people to do things. I mean, literally, you can tell an athlete, if once a week you'll take a 30-second video of yourself, we'll pay you $1,000. A lot of them wouldn't do it because they wouldn't want to get used to taking a video of themselves. And I think that part of the beauty of OverDog and kind of in a unique way that's relevant to where I came from is knowing that to make something scalable built upon athletes as a group of influencers, you have to make it super easy.
Yeah, that's very cool. I know in our conversation we talked a bit about sort of the lean starting approach. And I know you're a big student of the lean thing. So tell us a little bit about how that fit into the development of OverDog. And maybe lay out the backstory and how you got to where you are today. I'd love to hear how that was kind of folded into the development.
Sure. So OverDog had a predecessor company. It was a venture funded company called Pro Player Connect. And what Pro Player Connect was designed to do was find athletes ways to make money off the field. Speaking engagements, autograph signings, whatever it would be, and connecting them with a brand. And they had 2,800 pro athletes sign up with the Engagement Network, which is time and a half the size of every player in the NFL. It's pretty remarkable. But what they weren't doing was finding athletes ways to make money. It was kind of like Groupon for jocks. You could get discounts on golf clubs or half-price rental cars through Avis. And this was because, presumably these brands saw some value in having pro athletes use their product, but no one was making any money. The value proposition was kind of ringing hollow with athletes. And so I was a client of Pro Player Connect, and the original investor, who's still one of the managing partners there, still the chairman of our board, called me as a customer of Pro Player Connect because he knew I was in the technology world and he knew I had some experience there to just sort of break the business model. What did we think was working, what wasn't working. And so OverDog started with this 30,000-foot premise of if you can find a way to connect athletes and fans or influencers and people that are prone to be influenced through a behavior that doesn't introduce something new to the way they're used to behaving, that's infinitely more scalable and easier to execute on than trying to just create a marketplace out of thin air. And so, to bring it back to the lean methodology, we really just started tinkering and testing and seeing if this medium of video games showed promise. I would go call DJ Moore, who was a Vandy guy that played for the Bears at the time, and say, hey, can you tweet out that you're about to go play FIFA and see if you can find a fan? And I suppose if nobody had reacted to him, then we would have gotten some feedback there that maybe what we were doing wasn't so skillful. But we would do that, and then we would have Taj Gibson, who plays for the Bulls and played for my father-in-law when he was in college, just random connections around our network. And the reaction was unbelievable. I mean, Taj has 90,000 Twitter followers, and he sent out a challenge that says, who wants to go play NBA 2K, bring it. And it got 500 retweets, and a million conversations started out of that. What's your gamer tag? I'll kick your butt. I played Jimmy Butler last week. He stunk. The amount of conversations that came came out of that
Yeah.
one tweet was remarkable, where we knew that if we could build something scalable on that platform, that you could see some really interesting things happen for us and for the athletes. And so from that point to where we are now, it has, like, we haven't always stayed true to lean methodology, and at certain times when you're like doing an update for iOS 7, you do have to just sort of keep it all on there and hope it works.
Yeah.
But we generally try to stay true to trying one thing and then letting the market, letting the customers tell us whether they find that valuable or not. And as long as we, and by customers I mean both fans and athletes. And so everything we do always starts from the frame of mind of, is this valuable to our fans, and is this something that athletes are going to appreciate? And we, luckily, have very quick ways to gather that feedback and change course of what we thought might be true is proving not to be.
So I know one of the, has everybody read like Lean Startup or Lean Analytics, or both? Actually should read them both multiple times. The biggest challenge, you mentioned like, you got 500 followers and just 3 minutes all that is identifying, what stack is actually important to your business. Can you talk to that a little bit? Like what really, sort of define engagement?
I think of that in 2 frameworks, because we're still a startup, and I'm not sitting up here talking about, look at this awesome thing I've built. We're still in the middle of building it. So I think about it in terms of what proves your concept and what helps you raise money. And really, like, the driving metric for us in terms of making the community within the closed ecosystem of our app bigger is actually athlete games played. How many athletes have played how many games on the platform? And that is absolutely the engine that drives everything else.
That's your measure of success.
It brings the fans in. Everything is secured by, if we have a slow night and we have like 6 athletes play, and the next day we'll see 50 new downloads. If we have a huge night and we had a piece of press run, and the next day we'll see 3,000 downloads. And that is absolutely the engine that gets everything else going. So I've talked to a million VCs, especially in the last 10 days. I was just on the West Coast, and that to me is awesome feedback, even when the meetings don't go well, because you see the themes in terms of how people are framing your business model. And West Coast guys, they talk monthly active users and daily active users, and there's certain boxes that they have to check, because really for a first meeting, all they want to do is say, like, I can plausibly present this to the managing partners without getting fired. So it needs to be simple, and it needs to be something that you can understand without us needing to be sitting there explaining it to them. And for them, it's 2 things. It's users and it's revenue. And I would say the West Coast leans more towards caring about users, and around here they lean more towards caring about revenue. And I would sort of include in that stickiness. Like, it needs to be something that becomes habitual to both the fans and the athletes, because if the only way to grow the app is for it to sort of take on this community of its own, which is ultimately the value proposition we're promising in the long run, then it has to be something where people will continue to do it and to add value to the community without us having to pull levers of email or a phone call or do whatever else we need to do to sort of, reach critical mass in the short run.
Yeah. Is this your first attempt at raising money?
We sort of came in with the original round of financing. So that venture fund that I mentioned in Nashville, there is a grant matching system in the state of Tennessee where a suite of I think it's 6 or 8 venture funds that are located in Middle Tennessee, they invest in businesses, and then they get like 50 cents on the dollar matching grant from the state as part of a job creation mandate. And this, like, OverDog's now 9 employees, and 8 of those live in Nashville, and 4 of them we recruited to move to Nashville. So in that sense, I guess it's working.
Yeah. That's very cool. Maybe we should check out Nashville. So it's it's interesting to me that you talk about West Coast versus Chicago and raising money. And so do you kind of adjust your pitch when you go to the West Coast versus Chicago? And tell us a little bit more about that. I mean, I've experienced that, and I don't know if anybody else has. It seems to me
Yeah, I don't know that I can give like the whole gamut of experience yet. We're not actually actively raising money. We're more just sort of trying to get on radars to raise money in the spring. And so I was pretty transparent when I laid out our value proposition of OverDog. Here's what we set out to do, here's what we're doing, and here's where we want to be in another year or so. And really what I would leave these meetings and ask is, the primary reason I wanted to go into radars is because I would like to know what you would define as appropriate progress if you're going to think about investing in this by March. And just being that direct and then getting the feedback from them, I saw themes develop out there that usually had DAU, MAU, all these other acronyms that I had to pretend I knew what they were talking about. And here, and this is a small sample size because there's not as many PCs here, guys generally just want to sort of, understand your value proposition, understand if you're hitting the metrics that we would set out to define our progress by. And to me, there's not, one of those is not right and the other one wrong, they're just different.
Yeah. Let's go back to your team. So you mentioned now you've got nine folks, right? 4 of which you had to convince to move to Nashville. Tell us about that process. Identifying and what do you look for, and also, do you have a co-founder?
I have a co-founder, his name's Steve Berneman. And Steve worked on a previous startup in Nashville with our venture investor. And when we joined together to start OverDog, he was doing boutique sort of startup M&A law in Austin. So he's seen a million shapes and sizes of startups. This was just like it was my first time as a founder, but not his first time in a startup. I think we were both in sort of similar life stages in terms of where we were in that world, at least in terms of experience. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with a company called EO Interactive. They're headquartered in Nashville and have a big office here, 120 people or so. We got our VP of product from there. He's worked for a bunch of big companies like Accenture along the way. And he, for 2 non-technical co-founders, which is like, sounds the alarms for certain VC firms, that was a really key hire for us. He's a fantastic developer in his own right and has really managed all things on the product side for OverDog, where we had such a blind spot that we didn't even know. I mean, when we were first trying to find developers, send us some sample code. Like, what am I going to do? I don't know how to evaluate if somebody's as smart as they say they are. So we sort of lucked into finding Thomas, and he has been an absolute stud for us. Our VP of marketing used to be on the agency side of Deutsch. And that's been fantastic as we start to sort through RFPs and get some insertion orders where we're getting actual revenue as a marketing platform. One of her clients at Deutsch was PlayStation, which is obviously hugely relevant for us. And then she went to work for HuffPost, and after that, IGN. And for people in the audience who don't know, IGN is the world's largest video game news and reviews website, which is owned by a company that's owned by a company that's owned by News Corp. And so somebody at the top decided that IGN needed to get smaller, and they laid off like 100 marketing people. And she was, by no fault of her own, looking for a job, and we were quick to snatch her up and move her from LA to Nashville. It's a culture shock.
Good for you. What is the business model? I don't think you mentioned.
So there's a couple of things. Like, we sort of have 2 legs to our business model, the way we stand on it. The app itself, we hope will one day reach a critical mass where it's very valuable in the sense of we can lead our, hopefully one day, very large community of users around by the nose for virtual sales and, you know, roller coaster photo kind of things like mementos that I just played Matt Forte and let me get his autograph or something like that. But in the short run, the two things that we think will be the most promising are not necessarily, one is the reach of the athletes themselves. And we've already started seeing this come into play. Just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had $300,000 in revenue in terms of insertion orders from Activision, which makes Call of Duty, Call of Duty is the world's most popular video game. It's a shooter game, and their Call of Duty Ghosts comes on sale the first week of November. And they're spending money on our platform not to market to the 10 or 15,000 fans on OverDog's app, but to market to the millions of fans that our athletes have reached towards through their social streams. And so, for better or worse, OverDog is becoming a marketing platform for brands that want to get in front of sports fans. And so, even though we're small and we don't have a million people on the app, we still drive millions of impressions every week because our athletes tweet about what they're doing. And so what Activision is paying to do is have Adrian Peterson and Ray Rice and Jamal Charles and Des Bryant and all these other household names play games of Call of Duty and promote that they're giving that to their fans. And so that is really cool, and it's fun that we're now actually getting revenue and seeing that part of it work. And we've got big, very established brands like Subway, Buffalo Wild Wings, and Red Bull all sending us RFPs, trying to figure out how they can insert themselves into the conversation of what athletes are doing through this existing behavior that they all love, which is going and playing video games.
That's awesome. So I think we talked a little bit about this. Athletes, professional athletes are kind of an unusual breed in the sense that a lot of what they do is managed by somebody. Are you, in effect, disrupting that? Some degree, or
it's funny. That's exactly what Pro Player Connect wanted to do.
yeah.
Pro Player Connect's thesis was Hunter Hillenmeyer, who is at best like a local C-level celebrity when I was playing for the Bears, would get $1,500 to go sign autographs at the Walgreens grand opening.
And that sounds like
well, I mean, they were great.
Yeah.
An hour of your time for $1,000, like,
Yeah.
still sign me up. But literally, that transaction had the same number of transaction costs as Peyton Manning signing a deal with Gatorade.
Mm-hmm.
It goes through so many middlemen and gatekeepers that that's an industry in need of disruption. Like Walgreens, to do that, should just go online and say, I need a local Chicago athlete to come sign autographs at 7 o'clock on Tuesday. And we really don't care if it's me or any of the other 40 guys who would have done it for $1,500. And so, like, OverDog, or Pro Player Connect, set out to solve a very real problem. And now there's a couple of copycat businesses, one that Tiki Barber founded called Fusio, that are trying to solve that exact problem. And someone will make it happen. But to bring that forward to OverDog, we always prefer to go directly to the athlete. There's less things that can go wrong.
Sure.
But it's a necessary evil to go through the marketing rep at times. Mm-hmm. And that's because players have those marketing reps in some part because they need that insulation so they can stay focused on what their real job is, which is kind of helping them football.
Is it the higher the profile of the athlete, the more hoops you got to jump through?
Generally speaking, I mean, really lower profile athletes, like the best athletes to work with for us, and our second most popular sport by athlete participation is the MLS. The nicest guys in the world, they send us thank you notes when we send them free video games. Like, I always just marvel at how low their ego threshold is and what they're expecting in return. Mm-hmm. And then the worst is the NBA. I mean, if you want an NBA guy to pick up the phone and you got to pay him $5,000. And so literally we did some stuff at E3, and we were going to have Blake Griffin come out. Blake Griffin's Asian, is kind of a friend, a buddy of mine, and he said, "Oh yeah, sounds right up Blake's wheelhouse. He plays a lot of video games." we could probably get you a discount, because normal appearance fee is $100 grand, but I bet I could be able to do it for 70. And we needed them for like 2 hours. And so, I mean, my hat's off if there are people that are willing to pay $100,000 for 2 hours of Blake Harrison's time. But that is not a sustainable business.
That's hard to justify the ROI on that.
Yeah. And so, NFL guys are closer to NBA than MLS, but part of the beauty of OverDog is that those names I just rattled off for this thing we're doing for Activision, that would be $250,000 in appearance fees if Activision did it themselves. But with a guy like Adrian Peterson, he generally doesn't leave his house for less than 50 grand. But we're not asking him to leave his house.
Right.
And so there's beauty in the simplicity of what we're asking athletes to do that can still be useful in a marketing capacity for the brand.
Do the athletes, I mean, in a sense, become a media buy? Or is that...
Yeah, they do. I mean, we're dealing with the agency of record for Activision, it's a group called OverDog. And so hopefully we get a line item in there, and every time they launch a new game, they do their OverDog thing with athletes. And this is probably going to be a little boring, but to work with more than a certain number of athletes in any given sport, you have to have a licensing agreement with the Players Association, which we have. And so whether that's Activision or someone who wants to activate around the World Cup next summer, or Buffalo Wild Wings, or Axe Body Spray, these are all brands that would be limited to working with no more than one baseball player, no more than one basketball player, no more than 3 NFL guys. And the second they go one person above that, they're tripped with the need to go get a licensing agreement, which is a pain in the butt. And so just the fact that we allow them to circumvent the need for a license because we have one is a real value add to some of these agencies that just want it to be easy. We just want to know that they're going to get a return on their dollar and make it simple for them. Because they have RFPs out to 100 companies, and they don't have time to really read the fine print with every relationship. So if we can add value and shoot them a tweet that Michael Vick sent to his 2.5 million followers about Call of Duty, then there's value in that.
So what's ahead for OverDog?
The other leg, and that was a very long-winded way for me to not even get to the second leg. Believe it or not, and a lot of people in the room will shake their head at this, there is a huge appetite for people to watch other people play video games. 2 companies in particular. One is called Machinima, which is a multi-channel network on YouTube that is all video game content. Drives 2.5 billion video views every month. It's the #2 multi-channel network on YouTube, larger than every television station except for the 4 major television networks.
So what is it? So you're like watching Blake Griffin play Call of Duty?
Well, right now it's some 19-year-old playing Minecraft in his mom's basement that happens to be really funny and is engaging I still can't explain it, but I turn on a video and then I watch the whole thing.
Right.
And so, literally, like, that kid is making $700,000 a year posting videos of video games on YouTube. And this kid, and there's dozens, if not hundreds of them doing this on Machinima's network. They call them directors. They're famous for no other reason than the fact that they're interesting to watch play video games. And so part of the thesis for OverDog is that because our athletes have a huge head start, that if we can equip them to share the video games that they're playing as they're playing them, then we'll sell ads against it and we'll cut the athlete in as an affiliate. So every time LeBron James sits down to play a game of NBA 2K, the next generation of consoles, which come out in November, actually have a share button on the console. So there's currently a little bit of friction. You have to hook a device up to the console, you have to be a little bit of a computer whiz. In 3 months, all you have to do is push a button. And so if we can equip all of these athletes under the OverDog umbrella to turn on their video game, push a button, and then if 100,000 people watch, you just made $2,000, I'd do it. And so the goal for OverDog on that side of the building is that as the ease of sharing your video game while you're playing, the friction is literally all going away in 2 or 3 months. And we want to help athletes make money from playing video games from their couch. And that makes it makes it a lot more scalable for the fans too, because then instead of having one fan win and however many else going away scratching their heads, they can all be a part of that experience.
Why don't we open it up for some questions? Yeah?
I totally agree. And I stink at video games, so you might not want to watch me play. I think there's something, especially when the athletes are playing the game that they're actually in, there's a really interesting dynamic around that. And we've done a few pilot cases with this. Over Labor Day weekend, we had a 49er and a Seahawk. Chris Culliver was defensive back for the 49ers, and the backup running back for the Seahawks is a guy named Christian Michael. For the non-sports fans in the room, that's one of the biggest rivalries in the NFL. They're both very good football teams, and they play in the same division, so they play twice a year. And we had these guys play each other in Madden, and captured their back and forth from their 2 houses over Google Hangout. And I know I'm a sports fan and I'm hopelessly biased, but it was hilarious. Because the first thing that this backup running back did, whose avatar version of himself is not very good because he's a rookie, is bench Marshawn Lynch and put himself in the game. And then the whole time he's playing, we have all this on video, every time he has a good run, he's screaming, "Go little me! Go little me!" and so we capture all this content, and then we sort of edited and layered the back and forth of Google Hangouts over it, and we streamed it on Twitch TV. Twitch TV is a video game streaming website. That's all people do on there. And we didn't do any marketing, but right before it happened, we had the athletes tweet about it, and some of their teammates did the same thing. And then immediately before, I have a friend that's at SB Nation, they embedded the Twitch stream in the SB Nation blog for the 49ers and for the Seahawks. But not, very much so not expecting significant traffic, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 people. And we ran this little 45-minute video of these 2 guys playing Madden. And at the end of the 45 minutes, we had 95,000 people watching it. And that proved, and part of it was that it was relevant because we streamed it the Thursday prior to them playing on Sunday Night Football. And so I don't know that the content will always be interesting, but there's always an instance for us to insert ourselves into what's going on in the sports world at large and make it relevant to that conversation.
Your case study kind of convinced me that it can be.
Well, what's interesting about what you just described, and I don't know if anybody else picks this up, but you just created like an MVP of what you might build down the road, right? I mean, it's a use case. You got these 2 players together, they play, you streamed it on Twitch, and now you're like, got 95,000 visitors.
It's shocking.
Right.
I mean, I was on G-Chat with I edited in like 60 seconds at the beginning and halftime, me just sort of interrupting the game. When we were watching it and just sort of participating in chatting, I was on G-Chat with my co-founder while it was streaming, because we saw the use thing.
Yeah.
Holy,
Yeah.
what's going on?
And then you're like, well, this is going to work.
We got to do more of this.
Right.
And we act like we will. Like I had somebody last week calling, asking if they could set up a game between D'Angelo Hall and Des Bryant. That's a Redskin and a Cowboy who hate each other and have gotten in like 3 fights on the field during Cowboys-Redskins games. They played this past weekend. We didn't do it because we couldn't put a sponsor on it. But the only reason we couldn't put a sponsor on it is because part of the idea from Activision is that they want to be first to sponsor an athlete versus athlete game. So we're seeing that there's this latent demand for these athlete versus athlete games, and that can be a whole little cottage industry that's part of, but sort of separate to OverDog, and that it will hopefully make some very little money, but also serve as a great marketing tool to bring more people to the app.
What's been the feedback from the athletes?
The feedback is great, but it's always prettier from the outside than it is when you're in the weeds. in that like I can make it sound inevitable that we're going to be this huge successful business, but I was 7 threw us for a loop, and our devs were up for almost 3 days straight, trying to figure out why every time somebody took a challenge video right before they were going to send it to their fans saying, hey, I'm about to go play FIFA, the app would crash. And so, I mean, everybody's app broke when iOS 7 came out. And so, that's fine. Like, we only have 12,000 or so fans on the app, and so like users on that side of the fence are a little more fungible, but we can't dig ourselves into a hole with athletes because there just aren't that many of them. Yeah. And so we ask for patience from athletes, but we try not to need to ask. Yeah. And the thing that makes me the most nervous is whenever an athlete like tries to issue a challenge and something goes wrong, or the fan that wins happens to close the app and doesn't know they won, so the athlete's sitting there waiting and not getting connected to the fan. Like, those are all like instances where the app worked, but the athlete is having a bad experience by no fault of our own. And so OverDog, we continue to search for ways to be less prone to user error. But you know, certain things are just outside of control. Yeah, EA especially knows the power of that. They have an API where you can automatically pull results data from their games. Standings will be very important. Right now, our proxy for that is after you play the game, there's a button that says that you win or lose. And athletes care. And we're seeing this. David Price is on our advisory board. He won Cy Young last year for 2 days. And he played a few, like, he issued like 3 or 4 challenges. He wanted us and all of his Twitter followers to know that he was undefeated. and so that's cool and kind of funny, but it does, like, the opportunities that we're not exploiting yet are based around competitiveness and things like that. I think so. I mean, whenever we get an email from a fan that's effusive with praise that says, I can't believe I got to play David Price last night, it was the coolest thing I've ever seen, we forward that to David. We'll let it know that he provided somebody with a great experience. It's interesting that like part of how we try to explain ourselves in the long run, like, it's hard to articulate why athletes and celebrities use Twitter. I learned today, actually, that Chad Johnson gets $6,000 a tweet if you want to sponsor that. But that's really the only case I've heard of where an athlete is actually directly monetizing his Twitter stream. He has 3.8 million Twitter followers. So if you have 2,000, you're probably not going to be able to monetize it. But athletes still do it. And for whatever, like, you know, somewhere 6 years ago, Twitter was sitting in a room thinking, how do we get people to use this? And somebody said, well, like, maybe we could pay Justin Bieber and Lady Gaga. You know, we could see that being like how they would think to motivate people to like start creating content on Twitter, but they didn't. And like, I sort of think now that was probably like a hard decision to make, but kind of genius in that people probably wouldn't tweet, like if way back when they'd said athletes will give you $5 a tweet, probably wouldn't, probably be less likely to do it. Right. And so like, we hope to compensate athletes with a lot of money, but I think that the real feedback, the real hook for Twitter for an athlete is like seeing something you thought was pretty creative that you said get 50 retweets, or seeing somebody with a blue check mark follow you, where like, oh yeah, like I don't know a good example, but like Price followed me today. Wow, that's really cool. You know, he's got 100,000 Twitter followers. He's following me. Right. And I don't know what it is that makes it sticky, but it's so sticky for athletes. And we're not Twitter. We're not seeking to be Twitter. I sort of marvel at the network that they've been able to build. But I think that in the same way, there will be ways that we deliver value to athletes that maybe we don't really even anticipate yet.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting if you get to a point where you can actually report that. So I don't know if you guys have thought about that. Report to an athlete in terms of this is the reach. You know, replaying is one game. This is the reach from the game.
We tell athletes when they have a particularly high number of people accept their challenge. So we had this guy, his name's Juan Agudello, and he's a U.S. men's national team player, but he's not on the A team. He's like 19 or 20 years old, so he will eventually be a big soccer star. And he sent a challenge. It was his very first one, and we saw this wave of fans come in because we hadn't had a lot of soccer players use the app. And at the time, we had some huge number, like 17 fans accept this challenge, which was at that point a record. This was in June or something. And we told him that. You just sent the most accepted challenge in OverDog history. He thought that was the coolest thing ever. He played every night that week. and so, like, we haven't done it yet, but we have to continue to find ways to give athletes that positive feedback and experience. We're not building it to sell it, but I think that it's unlikely that we would get from here to where we want to go without seeing some acquisition offers. And the reason I say that is, like, if a year from now we're on an annualized revenue basis, we're at like $5 million or $10 million, regardless of what we can confine to OverDog as sort of attributable revenue, the amount we're moving the needle for like Xbox or PlayStation or some huge game publisher is a factor many times that number. Grand Theft Auto 5 went on sale a few weeks ago and sold $880 million worth of video games in 24 hours. That's the size of the business we're talking about here. It'll take Call of Duty Ghosts a day or two to get to $1 billion in video game sales. Like that is triple the size of huge blockbuster movie releases. And so if OverDog, because our athletes, our influencers, could prove that at the margin they could have an influence on whether you buy an Xbox or a PlayStation, and if that happens, like if Xbox calls in 6 months and offers us $80 million for the business, we would have to consider it. I mean, but ultimately, I think that would depend on where we're trending towards and whether we think that that's at or exceeding the value that we think we've created at that point. How sticky is it for the athletes? And it's all over the board. We have guys, Austin Berry, who plays for the Chicago Fire every time. He's the MLS Rookie of the Year last year. He's on OverDog 20 times a week. He uses it all the time. And that's sometimes multiple games in one setting, but we also have guys, like we have 250 athletes registered on the platform. That means they downloaded the app, signed up, and put in a gamer tag. But some portion of those have only used it once, and some portion of those have only used it a couple times, and then we have like our heavy users that are on there multiple times a week. And we can sort of pull certain levers, like 2 or 3 days ago, FIFA, the game FIFA that's made by EA, they sent us 40 copies and said, can you give these to your athletes and get them to tweet about it? We love that because it gives them a new game to play, because they're excited to get a free video game. And that goes a long way. You'd be surprised how far a free $50 game goes for these guys who make millions of dollars. Those are the kind of levers that we pull to make sure we keep it sticky for athletes. But that is a challenge, is like, we haven't figured out, like, Facebook knew way back when that 7 was the magical number of friends you have to get to before you were hooked. And they knew from their data that, like, once somebody had 7 friends, they were in the network and they were going to become in the 93% of Facebook users who were addicted and go every day. We don't know what that number is for athletes yet in terms of how many games you have to play before it's just the way you play video games. But as we get better data around that and we figure out, once an athlete issues 5 challenges, or maybe it's not a number of games, maybe it's once an athlete gets this response from a fan, like maybe it's some particular feeling that they need to get that hooks them. We haven't figured out what that is yet. I literally could give you an hour-long answer to that question. I think that is a fantastic idea. I've talked to Northwestern's athletic director about just that topic at some point in the last year. The fact that we are a video game company and the fact that EA and the NCAA themselves are getting sued for exploiting college athletes by not compensating them for their likeness and image in video games, it creates a slippery slope. And that there's a lawsuit out there right now that is the center of the NCAA amateurism conversation. It's this guy that used to play basketball at UCLA named Ed O'Bannon. He's suing the NCAA and EA for exploiting him, basically, and not compensating him for using his jersey, number, and likeness in the NCAA college basketball game EA makes. And I think that is a fantastic idea. You're totally right that it would really go a long way towards alleviating the bottleneck. And we're hoping that eventually that's possible, but we've had Vanderbilt, Northwestern, Princeton, Yale, Auburn, Ohio State, Oklahoma, USC, Oregon, and Cal all asked their conferences if it was okay for OverDog to use this, and we have not been able to get a definitive yes yet. And those are some universities that are willing to push the needle a little bit. I think about half of them are on probation right now for violating this. So we went to the right schools deliberately. And eventually we'll be able to do it, but just because we're painted with the broad brush of a video game company, I think it presents a tricky set of circumstances. And the last thing they want to do is jeopardize an athlete's eligibility, because I used to be one and I feel bad about it.
Right. So, good question for me. Internationally, I mean, I assume that is on the radar as well.
Yeah, a quick preface to that. Our most popular video games in order are Call of Duty, FIFA, and then a list of other games.
Yeah.
And FIFA is really popular here and a way of life everywhere else in the world. Right. And so it's a little tricky because there are very strict privacy laws in Europe. So like you can't even ask for an email without jumping through a whole bunch of hoops. And so that has slowed our entry into the European market. We went live in the UK about 2 weeks ago, but the only athletes we have issuing challenges over there are some U.S. international team players who play for Barclays Premier League teams. Mm-hmm. And we will shift resources to focus on the European market when we can. It's just like, there's certain things that we need to prove here before we take it over there. Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic idea. Certainly something that's more of a blind spot for us. The advisory board that you alluded to earlier, we have that advisory board which is mostly pro athletes to help sort of recruit through their network. We have a baseball player, we have a couple football players, we have an MLS guy. And I suppose that when it gets to that point, we have a professional wrestler, hockey, like we just have Jeremy Roenick to our advisory board, he's our hockey guy. And eventually we would want to find someone who understands the world of cricket better than we do before we would start recruiting athletes from that sport.
And the other one is that Formula One.
Yeah, I was going to
NASCAR to driving games.
NASCAR is a really interesting use case in that they're all huge gamers, and they actually use racing games as a training device. Real racing. They play this game called iRacing, which is a PC-based game. It's not a console game, but something we could easily power. I think it would actually be simpler to power the connection for. And we've talked to Darrell Waldrop and Brad Keselowski and some of these bigger name guys who love the games. We don't power connectivity for PC gaming yet. Yeah. We will eventually. And I personally think that would be the coolest use case because you're racing against an athlete in the game that models the sport that they're actually doing. You know, there's just something so epic about that. So World of Warcraft is primarily an online, it's a PC game. And so we actually have, one of our advisory board members is a guy named Chris Cluey. He was the punter for the Minnesota Vikings and the Raiders. He's actually most famous now for being a marriage equality advocate. And he is a huge, huge gamer. Loves World of Warcraft. His Twitter handle is Chris Warcraft. Until that is a humongous market. There's less overlap than you think. So OverDog's core user is kind of a sports fan who also plays video games. And there's a very deep, immersed market around, especially MMO games, that doesn't overlap so much with the more sort of mid-core casual gamer. And guys like Chris Cluey would be fantastic because those are the games that he plays. It's like pulling teeth to get him to come over and play Call of Duty because he plays StarCraft and League of Legends all the time. I think eventually we will power all games. I would love it if somebody wanted to play Candy Crush with, you know, Chicago Bear, or get Ken Jennings on some trivia game and play it on the mobile phone. Like, those are easier connections to make. And we would eventually like to expand to all forms of games and to all forms of influencers. We had, I don't know if there's any hip hop fans here, but we had Exhibit sign up. He got cashed as an athlete because he has a verified Twitter profile with 300,000 followers. And so I had to call Exhibit and say, hey man, sorry, we can't let you issue challenges because you're not an athlete. Thanks for signing up. So like the Activision thing that I talked about, we're setting up a few games where Jamal Charles and 5 Chiefs fans will play against Des Bryant and 5 Cowboys fans. Some iteration of it sounds a lot like that. And in certain games, like in that situation, we may do something where we find some of the fans that get to play in that game through Clout or some other platform that we can use to bring. Like we would perk the chance to play in that game to a bunch of Clout users who are influential in sports and video games. And so in all of the most extreme cases, we would prefer to keep, there's something like democratic and egalitarian about the way we connect athletes and fans. That's actually where the name OverDog came from. It's the sense that if the typical person tried to like D up on Kobe or tackle Adrian Peterson, you'd be in a bad spot. But when you put the sticks in your hand, we're all kind of equals. There's something, you know, it's anyone's game. They're like sort of leveling the playing field between what is usually a pretty vertical relationship between the fans and the athletes. And we're putting everybody on a level footing to see who's going to win in this separate but related realm. I have been trying so hard to get a book solo on the platform, and I actually, so one of our male advocates is a quarterback who's married to a U.S. women's national team soccer player, and I've traded at least 5 emails with her to try to get all of her teammates on the platform. She said several of them. Hope Solo, at the top of the first name she mentioned, is a huge gamer, and so we would love that. I've traded a few emails with a marketing rep from Brittany Griner. Like, we would love to get some of these girls on the platform. We just haven't succeeded in doing it yet. Less of them with gamers.
All right, cool. All right, everyone, let's give it up for Hunter.